So as I often do, I spent probably about an hour and a half last night looking at the readings for today and writing up something that I was going to talk to. And then on the way in on the train, I thought, no, I won't worry about reading it. Because I think it's much more relational when I can just talk from the heart and just talk to what's in my heart and what I feel about things. And I did have a bit of a chat with Jo and told her what I was thinking, and she said, no, that sounds fine. So hopefully I'll sort of try and stay on track, and Jo will prod me if I don't. Thank you very much for having me this morning. It's a pleasure to be in this wonderful church with you all. And for those on Zoom, hello, wherever you may be. Thank you for joining. One of the things that strikes me about the Luke reading today is, obviously it's this message of hope for people who are poor, who are hungry, who are grieving. It's a message of hope for them that God is with them and God will be with them and they will be with God despite their hardship. I think though sometimes there may be a tendency, obviously not with our wonderful group here, but for people to think, well, if the poor are blessed, they're okay. It's okay. They'll be right. They get to go to heaven. It's okay. We don't need to worry about it too much. However, the message in this particular reading at the end was that, if you are rich, if you are full, you might be in some strife. And I think, like a lot of the parts of the Bible, and particularly Luke's Gospel, I think if we read it in context, we see that while God does care for the poor and the weak and the oppressed and the disadvantaged, and he does love and care for them and show them his mercy, we also see the message, for example, in the Good Samaritan passage, about the need to love our neighbour. So just because God's got the poor, the weak, the oppressed, doesn't mean we shouldn't have them too. We have to treat those people as ourselves. We have to care for them. We have to show them mercy. So in our lives and what we do, if we see someone in need, we don't sort of just keep walking past. We don't walk past the injured man on the road. And I learned something not too long ago about the Good Samaritan story, because it sounds, as a kid we hear it, we sort of a lot of us have grown up with that story, and, it makes sense. Like the good guy is the one that helps. The good guy is the one that stops and goes, no, I'll put you on my donkey and I'll take you to the inn and I'll pay for someone to look after you and make sure you're okay. Like that's what a good person is. But interestingly, the priest, walks past someone who we think might help, normally. We would assume they might help. A Levite walks past. Again, they should probably help. The person that helps is a Samaritan. And as I understand it, someone explained to me that back in the day, back in Jesus' time, Samaritans weren't the most popular people, particularly with the Jews. They were probably, a Jewish person would probably, look down their nose a little bit at a Samaritan. But it was the Samaritan, the one who himself might have been excluded and on the outside, that stopped and helped. So I think in that there's this message that, our neighbour is everybody. Our neighbour is not just the rich neighbour or the neighbour that looks like us or the neighbour from our street or from our cultural background. The challenge in this is that our neighbour is actually the person that we might have had a fight with 10 years ago and we don't talk to anymore. That person is our neighbour too. In terms of Aboriginal people and First Peoples in this country, they are our neighbour. For me, it's easy to see Aboriginal people as my neighbour because I'm an Aboriginal person. I also see, because of that, I find it easy to see everybody as my neighbour. And interestingly, because of my particular family background, and I didn't tell Jo about this part, but anyway, hopefully I'll be all right. Because of my family history, so my grandmother's mother was raised on a station. She was put there by some nuns and a priest and told her mother had died giving birth to her. Even my nan, when she passed, she still didn't know whether her mum had actually whether her grandmother had died giving birth to her mum or not. Fortunately, my nan's brother, through lifelong research, ended up meeting someone from Tingha Land Council, who was able to say, no, she didn't die. Her name was Tina Brown. My nan's grandmother was Tina Brown, and she said, no, Tina didn't die. She went on to have two more sons, Victor and Gordon. So my nan's mum's name was Victoria, and apparently she was taken by the Catholic Church and put on this station. The station raised her as a domestic servant, but fortunately she did get to go to school and things like that. But for a lot of my life, I didn't know where my family line went. So I would look at Aboriginal, like I sort of knew because the priest was from Gadooga and the nuns were from Galargambone, or vice versa, but those two places. And the farm was around Bundara area, so it's a little triangle in northwestern New South Wales. So all my life I sort of had this affinity with Gomeroi people, Gamilaroi people, in around Moree and that sort of area. But I didn't know, I didn't know. So I would run into Aboriginal people from up there and sort of, I'd have to think that they all could be my family, they all could be my neighbour in that sense. So I tended to do whatever I could to engage with and help and be family with any Aboriginal person I met that was from that area. So as it turns out, I am related to sort of Browns and Munros and Sullivans from up around the Tingha area. So I've now been able to find out sort of more about my family line, and I know more of who I'm related to in that sense. But that story of mine as well is not just my story. A lot of Aboriginal people have a really similar story of intervention, to put it that way, by the church and impact on family and not knowing. And, I have people, for example, that say to me, but, it happened a long time ago. I sat with my nan at her kitchen table, and as a young bloke, I used to ask her all the time, like, what happened here and what do you know about this? Because I was really keen to understand who I was and where I came from. Towards, probably in my early 20s, I was having this conversation again, probably for the 50th time with my nan, and I think she got a bit frustrated with me, but she burst into tears and said, Nathan, I just don't know. I don't know. She didn't know who her grandmother was. She couldn't tell me. She didn't know who we were related to. And she burst into tears and was crying and said, I just feel like I'm a leaf blowing in the wind. I don't feel like I don't belong anywhere. So if you can imagine what that must be like, it's pretty hard, and so when people say to me, but it happened years ago, it doesn't make any difference anymore. I sat with my nan, this would probably be 15 years ago now, 20 years ago, like in my lifetime, and dealt with that grief. And for myself, with my kids, I haven't been able to tell them where they come from. Well, I can now, but for a long time I couldn't. So getting back on track, so yeah, we have this sort of faith-based mandate to care for our neighbours. We can't walk past disadvantage. We can't walk past injustice. We're compelled to do something about it. So, in the Uniting Church, in terms of First Peoples, we've got a reasonably good history of truth-telling, at least in recent decades. So, in 1988, there was a statement to the nation that included some quite good truth-telling. This is by the Uniting Church in Australia to the nation. It acknowledged the church's role in past history with First Peoples and committed to doing some things to change and sort of restorative justice type things. In 1988, in 1985, the Uniting Church supported the establishment of the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress, a group of Aboriginal Christians who were seeking support from a church to enable them to engage in ministry and mission activity. So that was a great thing. In 85, there was also a commitment of the church, I believe the Assembly, to not engage in celebrations of the bicentenary, which unfortunately was that decision was reversed. I may have my dates, my timeline wrong, but there was a commitment not to engage in celebration that unfortunately by some sections of the church was then changed, and sections of the church did celebrate the bicentenary, which obviously caused some distress and hurt to Congress, Uniting Aboriginal and the Christian Congress. That situation led to discussions over some years, which eventually led to the 1994 Statement of Commitment that was issued by the church to Congress, and there's a response from Congress to that Statement of Commitment. I won't read it to you because it's quite a long document, but you can all look it up on the internet. It is there. But essentially what the Statement of Commitment talks about is acknowledging that whether it was intentional or just by omission, whether it was active engagement in things or whether it was through sitting by and not saying anything, Christian churches in Australia were complicit in a whole lot of horrible things that happened to Aboriginal people. And look, I have been talked about this in a lot of places, and I often get people say to me, "Oh, but some Christians were really good. Some Christians would, protected Aboriginal people and looked after Aboriginal people," and I absolutely acknowledge that. And in a lot of cases, I think there probably was a sense of well-meaning and good intention in some of the things that were done. However, we also, if we look at history and we look at the truth of this history, there were murders and massacres, and there was abuse, and there was slavery, and there were a whole lot of things where human beings were treated really poorly by other human beings. And if we talk about loving our neighbour and everyone being our neighbour, and loving our neighbour as ourselves, I'm sure very few of us would like to be in a situation where we felt enslaved or dispossessed or abused. So that's sort of the truth stuff that is contained within the covenant statement. And the church also commits to, while acknowledging that history, the church commits to addressing some of those things in the ways that we can today and moving forward and trying to change things for the better. So obviously we don't have a time machine. We can't go back and change what's happened. And it's not about wanting anyone to feel guilty about what has happened, because we cannot literally go back and change it. If we could, I'm sure a lot of us would. We'd go back and do things differently. But what we can do is reflect on that past and think about what we can do as individuals and as a congregation and with our presbytery and as a church, both as a synod and as a whole church across the country. What can we do to make things a little bit better? What can we do to address some of this injustice that's occurred? What can we do to, in our local community, with our local Aboriginal organisation, with the local Aboriginal person we know up the street or that we bump into? So, in saying that, part of my role with the Synod when I came on board was to develop what we've called a Walking Together action plan. So a lot of you might have heard of reconciliation action plans. A lot of corporate organisations have them these days. They're sort of quite the flavour of not flavour of the month anymore, they're sort of flavour of the decade. I think they've been around quite a long time. But reconciliation action plans work quite well in a corporate setting because you tend to have a CEO, a board and a CEO and a whole lot of senior managers, and if they make a decision that something's going to happen, they just tell the people under them, you will do this, and make it so. So they've got this management line authority where they can tell their sort of people below them, please do this, we need to make this happen. Obviously in our Uniting Church setting, we don't work that way. Sharon Hollis, our national president, can't sort of sit up there and say, right, Pitt Street congregation, you're going to do this. Because that's not how it works in the Uniting Church. You guys have a lot of control and a lot of say in the decision making that happens in your church, as you should. So that's why we developed this Walking Together action plan, because we acknowledge that what we do in the church is relational. We need to all want to do it and to want to engage and to have the option. So the Walking Together action plan sets out a bunch of things that the Synod can do and presbyteries can do and congregations can do. For example, at a Synod level, just in case you think, the Synod's getting off lightly, no, they're not. We're looking at employment, for example, trying to lift the number of Aboriginal people employed across the Synod. Two of the things we're doing, looking at some traineeships, for example, in media and comms and in our venues area. So traineeships with a view to permanent employment. In our procurement space, we're looking at how much, what is our spend across the Synod in terms of goods and services, stationery, cleaning, property maintenance, like all these sorts of things. How much do we spend in terms of Aboriginal businesses? Because spending money in an Aboriginal business not only supports that business, it supports that family, it provides jobs for other Aboriginal people, it provides role models for community. So the social return on investment from using an Aboriginal supplier is much, much greater than just your average supplier down, in the phone book, so to speak. So we're looking at procurement and trying to lift the spend that we have in Aboriginal businesses. We've actually been able to employ an Aboriginal builder to do some maintenance work out on the Congress buildings out in Wellington and Condobolin. So that's a good start in that space. So again, that's something you guys could do locally as well, and anyone can do locally. In terms of congregations, what can you do? Because truth be known, I get a really wonderful sense of willingness and hope in our Uniting Church congregations. I so often have people that say, I really want to do something, but I'm just not sure where to start. I don't know, A lot of people don't really know any Aboriginal people. Well, one now, at least. And I'm around, and Joe can get you my phone number. And it isn't easy. Community engagement, Aboriginal community engagement isn't easy. It takes a bit of a knack. It takes things like learning. So in order to engage effectively, you need to really understand that history stuff. You need to understand about things like dispossession, about terra nullius, the doctrine of terra nullius, and how that was used. You need to understand about the stolen generations. You need to understand about the removal of children and the impact that had. You need to have this sort of empathy and compassion in terms of looking at that history and thinking, wow, how would I feel if that was me, if that was my family? It'd be pretty hard. So that then when you come across people who may be grieving, they may express that grief in anger, and you say, I'm from the church, and they say, bloody churches, rah, rah, rah. Because there's this anger, there's this sort of resentment about some of the stuff that the church might have done from their family. We need to be understanding in that space and accepting in that space and understand that that's quite a reasonable response, and we'd probably respond exactly the same. So if that happens and you can say, look, I really understand and I'm sorry, and look, I'd love to help at some time, if you'd like to give me a call, or maybe I'll pop back later. If you have that sort of approach, chances are the person you're talking to might say, no, look, it's all right, where are you from again? Because Aboriginal people may have this history of grief and trauma, but we're still people. So if we see that we've, someone's sort of a bit upset, or that we've sort of pushed someone away and they're feeling a bit bad about it, we'll tend to come back and go, no, look, come back, it's okay. What do you want to talk about? So, and if the first time you get pushed away, there's a factor of resilience in this that we need to do. And let me say that because of things like the Statement of Commitment and Statement to the Nation, the preamble to the Uniting Church Constitution, and some other documents, the heavy lifting in this space of building relationships and healing is on us. It's on us as a church. It's on us as church members to do that heavy lifting. We can't sit in our churches and think Aboriginal community people are just going to walk through the door and be friends with us, because that probably won't happen. If that was going to happen, it would have happened by now. So that it's really responsible. The responsibility is ours as a church to take the steps, to use the resources, to use our time and energy to go and build relationships, to go and meet people, to go and put ourselves out there. Look, I don't know how long I've got, but probably a couple more minutes. Joe will buzz me when I'm done. So I've developed. I wrote it's called a guide to Aboriginal community engagement and building trust relationships with Aboriginal people. It's on the Synod website. I can always get Joe the link for it, but if anyone is thinking about going into Engage, you probably should read that document. I do talk about the fact that when you read that guide, initially you may be thinking, this is all really hard and complex, and why would I even have a go at it? But that's not the point of the document. The point about being realistic about some of the challenges in the space is that I know a lot of people who say to me, oh look, I went down to the organisation and I tried to talk to them, but they just weren't interested and they were busy and they fobbed me off. That can happen. A lot of our organisations are dealing with crisis every day. Our leaders are dealing with death, with people in custody, with mental health illness in our communities. Like they are flat chat. So sometimes if you turn up happy and go, oh hi, I'm this person, I want to chat, they might be going, sorry, but busy. And that, from your point of view, might feel like you've been brushed, you've been pushed aside, they're not interested. That's not often the case. It's just the case that those people have much more pressing matters on hand. So be resilient, keep going back, keep being there. The questions that you need to ask yourself, I suppose, before you even do that is why? Why do you want to engage with Aboriginal people and Aboriginal communities or Aboriginal organisations? What's the why? Because if it's just to turn up and make yourself feel good that you've done something, or to have a photo opportunity, or to do a little story that you did that, that's probably not a good enough reason. if it's because you want to stand in, if it's because you understand the history of this country, if it's because you understand the injustice that's been done to First Peoples, if it's because you grieve that and feel that and want to make a difference in that, and you want to stand in solidarity with First Peoples, and you want to support their right to self-determination and to support their aspirations and their goals, that's the right reason. You should be there every time if that's where you're coming from. What do you bring to the table in that relationship? So don't get me wrong, you shouldn't ever turn up to an Aboriginal community and say, "Hi, I'm from the church. I know what you need. This is what you need. Here, I'm giving it to you." This is what happened in the past, and it wasn't good. Okay? There was an assumption that Aboriginal people needed to be a particular way, or to do a particular thing, or to speak a particular way, or dress a particular way. It didn't work. It caused a lot of harm. What I mean is that, if you're in a congregation and you've got a church building or a church hall or some tables and chairs or a barbecue, or you've got congregation members who may be an accountant or a lawyer or a social worker or a counsellor, these are the things in your kit bag that you keep in the back of your head. So when you go and talk to the organisation or the community and say, "Hi, how are you going? What's going on? What's important for you? What are you trying to achieve? What do you hope can happen in your community?" And they say, "Well, we've got a fundraiser on, but we've got no tables and chairs, and we're trying to find a barbecue." You can go, "Hang on, I know we've got that. I can offer that." If someone says, "Look, we've got a young bloke, he's struggling with a bit of legal stuff," you can go, "Oh, look, one of our members works at the Community Legal Centre. We'll link you up with them. They can help you out, give you a little bit of advice." If there's someone struggling to set up a business and they don't know how to manage their accounts, you might go, "Oh, we've got an accountant in our congregation and he's indicated that he'd be happy to do a bit of pro bono work and help." Link them up. So these are the sort of practical things you can do. Little things like flying a flag on the church, an Aboriginal flag outside. It might not seem like a lot. We've been talking about putting it on the bridge. It might not seem like a lot, but if you're an Aboriginal person, if I'm walking down the street and I see a building with an Aboriginal flag on it, I inherently know they're pretty cool. Like, they're on board, they're on side. Okay? It's a bit like the rainbow flag. It shows inclusion. It shows that we're welcome. So I won't go on too much more. Have I missed anything, Joe?
No, I think it's been great.
Yep.
There's an opportunity to talk on Zoom, isn't there, today?
Yes, there will be an opportunity to have a chat with me on Zoom. I love questions, because then I can, rather than me rambling on and telling you what you may already know, I can actually respond to relevant things in questions. So, look, thank you very much. I would say, as challenging as this space is, I find generally the Uniting Church to be a pretty amazing place, and pretty willing to listen and to learn and to work together to do good things. The Walking Together Action Plan approved by Synod is an absolute example of this, and we've got a history of this through the Statement to the Nation, the Statement of Commitment and things like that. The challenge that I put to church leadership is that it's relatively easy to make a statement of commitment on paper. It's relatively easy to draft up a Walking Together Action Plan. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. So what we need to do is to then look at these documents, and each of us, in all we do within the church, whether you're at a senior leadership level, presbytery level, local congregation, church leader, church council, or just a member of the congregation, it's what we can each do, even a little bit, to put that stuff into practice. Okay, so that's my challenge to you. My call to action is, please just have a think about it. Every single little bit of positive action helps. Everything. You might not think it makes a big difference, but it does. So yeah, thank you very much.